thank you for this opportunity. I'm working, as you said, as a journalist, basically covering the stories that our other panelists have just been sharing with us. So I'm focusing on abduction, forced marriage, and forced conversions. And both my master thesis in Islam and also in Christianity and Christian theology cover this. You've asked me, your General Assembly asked me to say something about why media are so reluctant to report on what we are discussing today. And just to illustrate that, we've just heard Marcella from Aid to the Church in Need, and they have written a report, I believe it was 2022, 2021, I'm not sure, called Hear Her Cries, which was exactly on the subject we are discussing today. And according to them, the UK department, Facebook censored their report. So coverage of these stories is really important. And I've recognized 4 issues that we're dealing with in Western media. One of them is that for example, Coptic Solidarity International and also Mr. Joseph Jansen has already said, when it concerns forced abduction, marriage, conversions, we are dealing with people from marginalized, discriminated groups, religious minority groups. And often Western media, people in the West, demand that these people give them statistics, numbers, before a problem is recognized as a problem. We need Western focus, the Western way of dealing with things, which is analyzing numbers. Because these are not marginalized groups, giving statistics, Coptic Solidarity International just highlighted that, indeed is really difficult, but that doesn't mean the problem doesn't exist. I think this is Western bias that we really need to address. One cannot expect marginalized, discriminated people to hand over the way that numbers, statistics of reports, the way we do that in the West. And one of them is also because authorities in these countries, in these regions, very often do not take parents seriously, do not sometimes even accept parents wanting to report a missing child. Research, as is where a child has gone, has been taken, isn't followed. All of that is a real big issue. And I think the media in the West, politicians in the West, for that matter, need to understand the dire situation these people are in. And unfortunately, in many countries in the West, this discrimination, that the fact that things don't work the same in other countries as they work here, where there is equality before the law, I think is one of the things that many people don't see. This brings us to the second problem that I see, and that is that media often believe what authoritative regimes tell them without any disclaimer. For example, that there's no problem with discrimination towards religious minorities, that there is no discrimination in law, and also, as Coptic Solidarity representative also highlighted, that in the media these girls sometimes are seen stating that they converted freely out of their own free will to Islam. These things also are very problematic, and I think that that is something that that we need to, in Western media, need to understand how things work in other countries. The third problem that I analyze, and that's a very important one, I think, is that we, even today in our modern world, in our contemporary time, we view sexual violence, for example, in conflict, as a problem not in its own right, but as a side effect of, for example, armed conflict or war, as we've seen, for example, with what happened to the Yazidi community in Iraq and Syria under ISIS. The rape and abduction, forced conversions of these girls, they are mentioned in the media, but almost only exclusively as side effect of the violence, to highlight or to stress, well, if you like, the barbarism of the abductors. This is problematic because for my research, I'm covering this, and that is that very often the abduction, as we've seen with ISIS, Yazidis, also Christian women, by the way, is covered. But what happens after the abduction, so the forced conversions, the sexual abuse, the sex slavery that we have seen, that we've heard from witnesses, is less covered. And in my thesis, I write about a mechanism which is by an American scholar. She wrote about the Roman time when Christianity was developing in the Middle East. And she said a spectacle needs spectators, and this is the issue. So when Boko Haram, for example, takes 300 schoolgirls into the jungle where nobody sees them, we lose their stories, their dire situation. We lose that out of our sight. And that is a huge issue. So therefore, we hardly see, not literally witness it, but I mean also having it in our thoughts, in our policies. We hardly see what is happening because it is happening away from the public eye. I think that's a very crucial point. Also, there's no follow-up. Even when girls are freed, as we've seen with Yazidis, there's hardly any media coverage of that. But there are very hard and very real issues, girls returning. One of them, for example, being children having no identity. Children, born out of rape. Another issue is women not being welcomed into their own society again because they were married to their abductor, because there were children from these rapes. This is not to blame the Yazidi community because they are dealing with this, but I'm just stating how traumatic and how far going, also in the long term, these problems with abduction, forced conversions, and abuse, how long this can take, the effect of it. And then another thing with that is that there is a word called soft genocide. And when we, as Dr. Stephanie Kopp said in her book about martyrdom, when we are interested in martyrdom, in persecution, we are mostly interested in, as she calls it, the gut and gore, so the very gruesome details. But as Mr. Luis Moreno Ocampo also said a few weeks ago, starvation, not giving access to food convoys, for example, as we've seen recently in Artsakh, or called Nagorno-Karabakh, is also a way of ethnic cleansing a people. This also, in my opinion, goes for the abuse of women, specifically of minority groups, which is, I think, stays under the radar. And with the Yazidis, for example, this has been well acknowledged that this can be a form of genocide, abducting people from minority groups, forcing them to convert, specifically women from fertile ages, so birth-giving ages, in the long term, in the long run, will cause these groups to become even smaller than they already are. So in my opinion, this is a form of genocide. And I don't use the term soft to marginalize what is happening, but I mean, it is not the violent way that we usually think of when we think of genocide. And my last issue is that girls often use their identity. And in our modern time of news bringing, identification, human interest is a very big part of news. And when we call, for example, in Nigeria, girls the Chibok girls, they have lost their identity. They're no longer Esther, they're no longer Naomi. They are Chibok girls or Yazidis. And this makes it very difficult for audiences to identify with victims, which is really important, as I said, in human interest, that way of bringing news. So all these aspects, all these problems that I have highlighted, I think need to be addressed in Western media. There needs to be much more attention to these problems. And we need to listen a lot more to the representatives that we've heard today from countries like Nigeria, Pakistan, Egypt, other countries as well. And need to hear from them and be open to listen to them and listen to the way things work there and the dire situation these people are in. Thank you very much.